Welcome to the MIM Podcast. I'm Adam Norman, founder and CEO at MIM, where we're on a mission to create the best major incident managers in the world. At MIM, our clients range from the largest, most well-known companies through to new, innovative companies across almost every industry from more than 72 different countries. You're going to hear about the best practices, strategies and tactics, how companies deliver major incident management excellence, some of the challenges they face, and different views on major incident management from around the world, as well as how major incident management is constantly evolving. On this podcast, we go deeper, interviewing professionals from the community. Our hope is that you will leave this podcast with some new ideas and a greater passion for major incident performance. In this episode, I speak with Allan Ramiro, a global major incident manager at First Data. Allan talks about his long career in major incident management, particularly in the banking sector. Allan's held operational major incident manager roles all the way through to Vice President of Major Incident Management. He's worked for companies such as JP Chase, Citibank, the Commonwealth Bank, as well as other leading organisations in different industries like IBM and Hewlett Packard. Allan talks about moving between 4 different countries each time for new roles and what it was like. He gives us his thoughts on what it takes to be a good major incident manager, particularly in banking, and the differences of major incident management in the banking sector. We hope you enjoy the show. Hi Allan, how are you doing?
Doing good, Adam. How are you?
Very well, thank you, very well. Thank you ever so much for giving up your time and coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
For those of you that don't know Allan, he has had a very long career in major incident management and IT service management, holding both operational and leadership roles in a number of companies across a number of countries as well. Actually, very interesting. So, Allan, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your experience and your background.
Sure, yeah. Hey, so good day, everyone. My name is Allan Ramiro. I'm originally from the Philippines, but I've been hopping around in different countries. So I started off my journey from the Philippines going to Singapore, and where Citibank and JP gave me the opportunity to be one of their incident managers. And at the same time, moved to Houston, Texas, this time with JP still, as again, one of their incident/problem manager at that point in time. Some opportunities came here in Australia, which landed me a job in one of the top 4 banks in Australia, Commonwealth Bank. And now I'm working as one of the major global incident manager for First Data, now called Fiserv, one of the payment processing services in North America and globally as well. So, just to give you a little bit more context on who Fiserv or First Data is, imagine if you use one of the POS devices in a supermarket or in any store, Starbucks, Walmart, what have you. Chances are we process those payments. We are in between the banks, your banks, and the merchants' banks. We process those payments. So we're like kind of middleman of routing the money, so to speak.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So I imagine the type of major incidents that you deal with, particularly frontline ones, if they're impacting customers, are pretty high pressure and time sensitive.
Oh, tell me about it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just to give you an idea, just in North America alone, on a regular day, we would process hundreds of thousands of transactions in a minute. So that's just in a minute. Imagine the systems involved, the technology, the collaboration, the coordination involved in making that happen. So yeah, a minute incident, 100,000 transactions. It could mean that, or it could be something else. I'm lucky that we have a lot of resilience in our systems that prevents us from happening again, as well as monitoring as well. We have an excellent team, monitoring team that does a good job of making sure that we prevent issues from happening, major issues from happening. That is.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to the wider public, or to those who aren't as familiar with IT operations, particularly in large companies, enterprise size. It's interesting because I think there is an assumption sometimes that major incidents don't necessarily occur, like banking, for instance. I think that the general public would have no idea, but the reality is that no matter how good your systems are, no matter how much resilience is built in, no matter how many experts you have on hand, there will always be major incidents, because technology and the rate of change and what we demand from it is it's exponential at the moment, the growth, which with it comes more challenges in managing that.
Yeah.
But that must be a really interesting environment, because there's a real direct sense of what the downtime is causing as an issue. I know some people feel really removed, but for you guys, if there's 100,000 or hundreds of thousands of transactions that can't be processed, you must be talking for your end customers, potentially stopping millions of pounds. So it must be fascinating to work for them.
Indeed, yeah, and those transactions are processed through multiple platforms, or what we call it. So if one platform goes down, so a number of transactions might be impacted. But we do have built-in resiliency, especially during major U.S. holidays such as Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Thanksgiving, Christmas. We don't have Boxing Day in the U.S. We do have New Year's and Christmas. So those are the busiest time of the year for us.
Okay. So I'm really interested, and I'd love to come back and talk more about what you're doing in your current role. But I'm actually really interested because you've essentially done leadership and operational positions for major incident management. So you were the VP of major incident management for a large bank. You've held major incident manager roles. But you've, as you mentioned, kind of done that across 4 different countries. I know there's a lot who would be really interested to hear about kind of how the opportunity to move country and still kind of stay in the profession came about, because it's Singapore, Australia, the States, and the Philippines. Is that correct? The 4 different.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So how did those opportunities come about?
So my journey started with Hewlett Packard, where I was head of the operations for their global call center for one of their companies, one of their customers, Procter and Gamble. So we started off with supporting Asia Pacific, EMEA, and gradually moved into supporting North America after hours, because we do follow the sun support. It was quite interesting how incident management works there, because I own the incident management process at that point in time, being the head of the level 1 operations for the global call center back then. Opportunity came about when I remember this 2006. Out of the blue, I just received a call from Optimum Solutions, which was the hiring company for Citibank at that point in time, saying, "Allan, are you interested in this kind of incident management?" I said, "Hey, yeah, I'm already doing incident management." Then got an interview, got accepted. The minute I landed in Singapore, I knew everything is different because of the culture and everything. And then while working for Citibank in Singapore, I came across another opportunity for JP Morgan at that point in time, where they were just setting up shop in Singapore, expanding their Asia Pacific business. I guess the opportunity came about when both Citibank and JP Morgan looked at Singapore as their financial hub at that point. So opportunities for incident management came about. And as you can imagine, the skills needed for incident manager now is quite rare. It's quite it's not known at the moment. When you say, "Hey, I'm mechanical engineer, I'm an aeronautics engineer. It's kind of common kind of things. But when we say incident manager, people ask me a lot of times, what is an incident manager? Then we have to explain what that is. Imagine it's rare now, how rare it was back in 2006. So it was a very unknown position at that point in time, and we came through. We pushed through it. I have a lot of colleagues that came from other parts of the world, Singapore, India, and of course we've known some of my colleagues in UK and in North America as well. Then came about JP Morgan. I was already working for JP Morgan when they had an opening in the US where I just said, hey, I'm interested to apply for that role. Would you be able to take me? Luckily enough, they did. I remember what my manager told me, Allan, I will take you in a heartbeat. So that kind of filled my heart back then. So yeah, so she did. They worked on the sponsorship for moving me there. Working there for 5 years, an opportunity to work here in Australia came about, where moving close to home and moving my family again. I worked for a Commonwealth Bank. I was a service governance assurance for, so to say, cybersecurity, part of their an entity where I was responsible for the end-to-end penetration testing process of the client-facing entities or applications, where I also manage the resolution of any issues therein. Now, why did I end up in Fresh Data? It's quite funny because my former colleagues back in JP Morgan moved to Fresh Data in Houston as well, and then they just called me up. Hey, Allan, we're setting up shop in Australia. Interested to join the incident management team for us? I was like, why not? So it's, how can you say no to somebody who already believes in what you can do and trust your skills for you to be able to be invited to work for them once again? So that is very comforting to know, and it's heartwarming for me to know that there are people who trust in what I can do.
That's fantastic. So essentially, it sounds like most of those moves came about because of the existing relationships you had, and as you say, there were people who knew your capabilities and that you could deliver in the role, so you're essentially sought after. Okay, I think people will find that really interesting. Actually, I know there's a lot of people out there, and you're right. I think even now, where we as a company are trying very hard to champion the community and bring together lots of major incident managers and professionals who are interested in major incident management. Even with the virtual event that we did and had several thousand people at it, it's still definitely a less common role. And I think prior to 2015, prior to the initial training programs we created, nothing really existed out there. So I think you found that people who had a natural disposition, who had high tolerance for stress, who had very good people skills and leadership skills, perhaps naturally more so than learned, tended to thrive in the role. But I think even then that was far between. I think you saw a lot of people who moved into the role and perhaps decided it wasn't for them. But it's interesting. We're seeing more and more companies understanding the need to have these people involved, and we're seeing more and more people come through the training and really try to excel at what they're doing in the operation. But it's really interesting to speak to someone like yourself who's been doing it for such a long time, and essentially even prior to any of the global best practice existing, having that experience in banks. With I'm really fortunate. Me and the team get to travel a lot and meet with whether it's CEOs or other leadership, and it's really interesting always hearing their perspective of major incident management, because there hasn't been as much information out there. I think in a sense it's a little bit like cybersecurity, in that people don't tend to, or leadership don't tend to focus on it. They're not as familiar until it's too late, until there's a problem. and then potentially they start to invest in a function or a service. But what's really interesting, and I'm sure people would love to hear, is first of all what your experience of working in banking and the financial sector for major incident management is, because in the consulting we do, I find that banking differs greatly from most other industries in the way that they do incident management. I tend to find actually that they're some of the best major incident functions you will see. Them and telecoms are very good as well, but banking seems to be the pinnacle of major incident managers, and the standards that they require and expect, and the investment they put in as well. They tend to pay more, so they get more experienced and skilled staff. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how major incident management in banking perhaps differs from others.
Yeah, well, banking is a very high what do we call stressful situation where a minute, a second of an issue could cost thousands of dollars, lost opportunity, and actually lose dollars, especially when I used to work for an investment bank where trading is really key. We had so many incidents that people are or customers, for the end users themselves, the traders, you would tend to take for granted a piece of equipment that is actually very important for a trader. Like, say, for example, an Avaya phone, an extension of that Avaya phone, the ticker boards, what we call them, those that shows the lines of how much. So absence of those for a fraction of an hour, so it's like minutes or a delay, could cost them opportunities that could make them lose millions of dollars. A wrong decision, a wrong move, a wrong trade could really cost us a lot of money. And that's not only for the trades, but also to our shareholders. Back then, it's always them that we have in mind and in our hearts, and the way we do business. We make sure that we're doing the right thing for them, and making sure that we have all the appropriate information in front of them. The deal with banking really is, the decision makers are indeed the bankers, or those there are the traders or the decision makers. From an IT standpoint, we just make sure that we equip them with the information that they need at that point in time, with the most accurate information there is. And it could come from many avenues: a screen board, a ticker board, a graph, or even their PCs is really an essential tool for them to be able to make those snappy decisions the quickest possible time. Being able via phone with those extensions ensures that with just a press of a button, without them memorizing who to call to, is there always available. They don't have to dial a few numbers. So I know it takes just 5-6 more seconds to dial a number than to press a button, but for them, those 6 seconds are crucial for them to be able to do things. So yeah, it's very stressful. But it's very rewarding and exciting as well, because when you avert issues, when you learn, it really is something that would be, what do we call this, polishing a diamond skills kind of thing. So you come in as a rough coal, and then you polish because of the pressure, the things that you experience while working as an incident manager in a financial sector. Polishes you to a diamond. It becomes it makes you better, really, as an incident manager. It makes you, what do you call it, for lack of a better term, immune to some of the words that normally people will not use in their daily lives. There are some funny stories out there that if you've seen Wall Street with Leonardo DiCaprio, that is what we experience on a daily basis when we are on shift.
Oh wow, brilliant!
Yeah,
Fantastic.
it is. Yeah, It's really high. It's very demanding of what you do, and the coordination really needed for you to be able to do this. Like, say, for example, for just to move from one server to another, move that application from one server to another. Normally, it will just in some companies, one person can decide that. An incident manager can decide that. But in a major bank, you have to take the risk unless it's predefined already. If it's not defined, then we would need to have managers, operational manager, infrastructure managers, some of those who have oversight of the operations need to weigh in and decide, hey, do we want to move that from server A to server B? Do we want to move that from B to C? Or is there an alternative? Do we want to move A to F? Those kind of things that come into play. Incident managers are the one who coordinates and makes that happen at that point in time. Sometimes we manage the managers and not just their technical resources to make a decision, to arrive at the decision. And all we need is really just, hey guys, make a decision. And it's not us who makes who performs the keystrokes, who pushes a button, who moves the mouse cursor. It's a technical guy just waiting on the background saying, hey guys, just decide what you need to do and I'll key it in. And that's where internet managers does really need to have a very good grasp of a technical knowledge, be able to understand the technology behind it, how it works, how it interconnects with each other. Of course, how you manage people, how you collaborate with people, is also one of the key points that an incident manager should have.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. We'll jump into the skills in a moment, but it is one of the most interesting roles if you have the ability to withstand some of the pressure, particularly in the banks. It's one of the best roles to develop your leadership skills and your interpersonal skills, as well as, I think there's no other role that gives you as much exposure to all areas of the operation. Which is often, I think, why you see very good major incident managers tend to go on and have very good careers. If they stay in major incident management, it's often you see them go into the better paying roles, which again are often in the banks. The salaries are higher because they require the experience and which is obviously desirable. But I think also there's very few roles which bring quite as much excitement and also a sense of accomplishment. I think it's quite special when it's a while ago now, but when I was doing operational major incident management, no matter how hard those days or nights were, if it ran over, I think they were some of the most fulfilling of my career, in the sense of camaraderie with the technical teams and the wider operational team, the sense that you're actually doing really good work, and also how exciting and fast paced it can be. I think it's really quite a special role, but it's also, I think, why you see people who have a natural talent for it tend to go on into senior leadership positions. Their careers tend to do very well. I think the combination of exposure you get and the people you meet and the visibility from the leadership team, they're seeing all the comms you issue, you're potentially having one-on-one conversations, they get a real sense of your capabilities, coupled with the skills you get to practice and work on. There's very few other jobs, I think, where you get so much experience in leading under such pressure. And so I think everything after that in your career tends to be fairly easy compared to perhaps some of your more challenging days as a major incident manager. I think you also get to fail a lot and improve really, really quickly. I think in normal leadership roles, you get to these scenarios or difficult scenarios might come up once a month, maybe once a week if you've got a challenge. Whereas major incident management, you might be dealing with 2 or 3 of these a day.
That's right.
Like you say, I think a fantastic analogy of a coal essentially being shaped into a diamond. I think in some of the fastest possible time. It's interesting. We're trying to partner with the community to bring awareness to younger professionals, particularly university graduates, business people who specialised in business majors, actually show them that there's a career path here that's really interesting in technology. I know a lot of companies are looking at these people. So I'd be really interested, the sorts in the various roles that you've held, what sort of sizes were the major incident teams, or not the wider technical team supporting, but how many people were roughly in the teams at most of these banks?
Incident managers, well, yeah, it depends from industry to industry. For banks, yeah, of course, there's going to be a global role, follow the sun, which comprises of, I would say, the most number of incident managers I get to work with, or I'm involved with in an organization, is roughly about 20 incident managers in a global capacity doing follow the sun, separated in Australia, UK, and the US. So that's where we do the follow the sun. It depends on the model. There are some models like they do just Singapore and the US, where they would have less people to deal with, as long as they know the processes and culture and the needs of the other three regions. And of course, it depends on a non-banking industry, non-financial industry. Let's just be one or two incident managers, because what I realized, the difference in incident management does not vary so much from company to company, but it varies on the industry it belongs to. Say, for example, in HP, and when I was leading the global call center operations for the Procter and Gamble company, or our client, the focus really more on knowledge database, known error databases. Is how we update the known error databases, how we improve as we go along. The more incidents that we handle, how much better do we become. But compared to a bank, it's always firefighting, it's always urgent, it's always do it now. And if a bank is not yet mature enough on their operations, that's where the problem really happens. It's like detangling a spaghetti when it comes to dealing with incident management back then. But if they're mature enough, they have structures in place, they have backups and everything. Incident management tends to become easier as time goes by. But yeah, it does vary from industry to industry, not even country to country, company to company. It depends on actually the industry that it belongs to.
I 100% agree. I think, again, we're really fortunate. We get to, companies now have got clients in about 70 different countries, and so we get some really interesting insight. And it's been interesting that a lot of major incident professionals or people who work or leadership within the IT operation have perhaps been very quiet and not formed much of a community around major incident management, because I think it ultimately comes down to marketing departments. I think the marketing departments of large companies who don't necessarily understand the operations feel that it might be intellectual property that they are discussing or talking about. And the reality is that very few companies have anything particularly special or different from other companies. A lot of it is down to the skill and talent of the individuals who run the major incident function. I think the process aspect of it, yes, is very useful, but typically if you're a mature organization, as you say, who have been doing it for a long time and improving on that, is fairly similar from company to company. I think what differs is the way communications are issued, comms are issued, the way stakeholders are treated, and often that's around the leadership of the major incident function. And as you say, them driving, having somebody who is not operational in the major incident team, so they're not constantly pulled away and they're able to focus on the improvement and the shared knowledge of the team. But that's really interesting, actually, which kind of brings me on to another question I was keen to ask you, which would be, what do you personally feel are the biggest skills that a major incident manager should develop or should have?
Well, coming from a financial sector, an incident manager in a bank can do well if she has a good grasp of the processes, a focus on the end goal, which is to restore service, and the ability to control the narrative of the conversation. And of course, be understood. Those are the kind of soft skills that would make a good incident manager. However, what makes a really effective incident manager is the tribal knowledge of the organization, who's doing what. When they say, hey, application XYZ, do you know what that is? When you say trident, like, what's a trident? No, that's Neptune's fork. No, it's not. It's this application. So those tribal knowledge, ability to gain those tribal knowledge is what makes you a good incident manager. To top it all off, you need to be able to build relationships with other support teams, other incident managers, other people, CIO, CTO of a particular team. If you build relationships with them, it does really a lot of good things when you're handling an issue, because it's like really a relationship, so to speak. You don't speak to them when there is an issue. You speak to them when there is no issue, when you want to learn more about what they're doing. You put interest in what their goals are, their focuses are. So you as an incident manager can take that knowledge at the back of your mind. So when they have an issue, or not even when they have an issue, but when another team has an issue and you need their help, you would be able to say, hey, a good challenge for you that might be able to help you on your goal by helping this team here, by sharing whatever you can in order to resolve this issue. Or can you lend me one of your experts who has done SQL or whatever technical capabilities that has, or just collaborate more. Say, hey, I know you're not supposed to be involved in this one, but it will really help you in a way by helping this person. It's just really, for you to be a good incident manager, you need to be able to coordinate. You need to be a people person. You can be a pushy person. You could act like a drill sergeant that commands, hey, you do this, you do that. But you can, that will only give you as far, but it will not build your relationship. People will tend to talk behind your back if you're that kind of a person. It will not encourage collaboration, will not encourage teamwork if you're a drill sergeant on bridges. So be able to collaborate.
I couldn't I couldn't agree more. I think it's really interesting that you say that. I think we always talk about it's no good winning for one major incident, creating a win-lose scenario, particularly with your technical resolving groups and the experts. You need to be winning for the organization across 100 or across the next 1,000 major incidents. And in order to do that, you're heavily reliant on the expertise of technical resolving groups. Even if you come from the technical backgrounds, there are professionals who dedicate decades of their life to mastering and understanding one technology, which should tell us something. There is no single person who has the ability to understand every aspect of a complex IT operation and the infrastructure, which means that it's definitely a team sport. And as you say, I'm sure my younger self, particularly at the start, made some of the mistakes, as you say, of perhaps being a bit more like the drill sergeant, where and unfortunately that can be really effective in an individual scenario. But as you say, you can't win for one major incident. You need to be winning in order for it to be successful, and you need the relationships. And we always talk about the emotional bank account, which is essentially what you touched upon about instead of just speaking to these people when there is a major incident and you need something from them, taking the time to actually build those relationships outside of a major incident and really starting to build proper rapport, so that when you do need to ask of them, you've essentially got some let's call it currency in the emotional bank account with that individual. So you are
That's right. Yeah.
You're essentially, every time you ask something, particularly something difficult, you're essentially withdrawing from that emotional bank account. Whereas every time you're taking it outside of a major incident to understand them or support them in some way, essentially you are depositing in that, and you always want to obviously stay in the back bank account. So really interesting. In terms of the skills that major incidents have, we've talked a lot about the soft skills, but also the knowledge that comes essentially from working within an organization. So understanding the infrastructure, the setup, the business applications. I think it's really important that we delve into that, because I think one of the biggest aspects that I think operations pull down is, even if they invest in their major teams, particularly the larger companies are more guilty, because I think it's harder to do. They don't necessarily impress the urgency and necessity of documenting exactly what the business does, what essentially hangs off the services we provide to them, and how those things are directly impacted. One of the biggest things that I think is missed out is quantifying downtime. And so looking at not just if it's easy, if you're an e-commerce retailer and you have historic information, you can essentially go, well, we couldn't process payments within that period. Some of the customers may have purchased once we restored service, but we may have lost, let's say, £100,000 in 10 minutes or an hour or whatever it may be. But I think things like reputational damage, if you're a publicly traded company, potentially the share prices that get hit, and we see this with a lot of cyber incidents at the moment, which obviously major incident management essentially wraps around that and should be coordinating them like another technical resolving group. But I think also workforce productivity, understanding that there are potentially projects that are delayed, and even if that's a day within a large organisation, you can have contractors who are billing £1,000 a day per person, and that's just adding what, £100,000 or more it may be. So there's lots of interesting areas, I think, that operations miss out on, because they don't, as you say, spend the time to impart the knowledge, not just to the major incident managers, but imparting that knowledge with the business and getting the business to essentially support what IT is doing. I think it feels very far removed in large companies, or it feels difficult to access the individuals who understand the monetary value of the actual business. But I couldn't agree more. I think it's absolutely. So I guess
one of the skills as well I'd like to add on to that is there's some questions of technical skills, like how technical should an incident manager be? I guess it's as long as you have a good grasp of technical aptitude, you know how things work, you know how a server connects to a database, mid-range, AS400, or those ancient stuff that comes in. As long as a little bit of knowledge really helps out. You don't have to really know how to code. If you do, and also know commands, it will help out in the resolution process. But I guess that's where you should, as an incident manager, you shouldn't be the one writing codes, entering commands in a system. You should be the one coordinating that. You should be able to trust your technical teams in able to do that. Yeah, you may be able to guide them. Say, hey, have you enabled verbose logging in this particular system, so you know what's going on. Having knowledge such as that helps you. But say, for example, you don't know that. What can you do if you don't know that technically? You focus now more on your leadership side. Like, ask the people, how can you do this. How our main goal is to know what's happening. We don't know what's happening. Why that particular server disconnects every 30 seconds. So how do we know that? Oh, so sometimes you could do the reverse psychology. If I want to break this particular server, I want to disconnect it every 30 seconds. What do you do? So you focus on those soft skills, even if you don't have those technical skills. So it's kind of a mix of both. If you have a mix of both, that kind of leadership skills and a technical knowledge, you can be called a unicorn. Yeah, you're very rare.
I think I absolutely agree. I think I think all of it depends on the operation. I know that sounds like a bit of a cop out as an answer to as you say, what technical skills or abilities should a major incident manager have? But I think in very large organizations that are very well staffed, I think you can, as long as you learn quickly and can understand new concepts very quickly and also translate those into plain speak for the stakeholder management aspects, I think you can get away with having far less technical skills or knowledge. I mean, there's certain basic things that people should understand, but I think you get a lot of that from being a major incident manager. I certainly know, again, a long time ago, but when I was younger, when I started out with Fujitsu, I had very little technical knowledge, but I had a lot of natural talent for leading and managing. And because I was good at building relationships, actually, the technical experts, some really brilliant people that I worked with at Fujitsu, were kind enough to actually take the extra time and explain these things to me and were patient enough with me.
That's right, yeah.
And I think that's essentially how it built. So I think, however, I don't think you can get away with it the other way around. I think if you have a lot of technical ability, but you're not able to lead people,
that's right, yeah.
If you're in a really small company where you can just about get away with that. Whereas I think the larger the organization, the more moving parts, I think you can't get away with that. The leadership skills and the soft skills, as it were, and the relationship elements are far more important. It's really interesting. There's almost, in the commercial world anyway, obviously there are more challenging jobs, particularly if you start talking about things like armed forces.
That's right, yeah.
Or things that have working on oil rigs. But I think the major incident management has a really unique positioning in that you have lots of different stakeholders, all with different needs, agendas, and you have the shortest amount of time to convey information and build confidence in those different stakeholders and individuals.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, project management is a good example of another thing that has very many stakeholders, particularly large programs. However, they have time to plan their approach with each individual stakeholder. They often get individual one-on-one time. They can build knowledge over a very long period of time. Whereas as major incident professionals, you often have seconds, minutes to try and instill confidence in these individuals, and
that's right, yeah.
Very brief engagements. So it's quite unique, but really interesting. So if you were to start your career again as a youngster, what advice would you give yourself? So starting out as a major incident manager, what do you think you would tell your younger self, or what would you tell others now who are looking to get into it, or they're new to the role, they're looking to develop? What would you say to yourself? What advice would you give your younger self?
So what advice would I give myself if I want to start a career again? Is on every engagement, know the end goal. Focus on the end goal. At every minute of the process, keep in mind the goal really is to restore service. The minute that they, I don't know how incident comes into the organization. Mine before was through a phone call. Nowadays, it's through a ticketing system, some through a page. So from the start of that engagement, understand what the end goal really is. Okay, something's broken. We need to fix it. The goal is to fix it. Focus on that. Get the people, and everything comes in to be able to support that end goal. Are you engaging this person? Will he or she be able to contribute to the end goal? Focus on that, because sometimes when I was starting, and I had uh, so many things going on, that in an incident call, I tried to find the root cause, because that's what my training back then as a problem manager. So that's why you really can't have both two hats, an incident and a problem manager at the same time. Uh, it kind of conflicts behind your mind what needs to happen. Yeah. So focus on the end goal, know the people, and collaborate. So that's what the second thing that I'd like to give my future self. So my back then when I was starting, on previous self, not when I was starting, I just talk to the people when there is an issue. That is a bad move, because you only know the people when they are uh, in their most agitated, frightened, and so to speak, pressured state. Um, and this came to me as a realization that during one of the corporate events sponsored by the company, I get to know the people that I used to work with. So at that point in time, and I have never really met. I worked for the company for almost a year. Never met them. Know how they sound like, but never know what they look like. So in this corporate event, when this dinner, like I say, get to know the people, get to know who they are, get to know what they are when they're not resolving an issue. That kind of gives you a little bit more perspective. So what I do now is, whenever I join an organization, I make sure I walk to the people. Hey, my name is Allan. I'm the new incident manager, and it helps if a former colleague, or if a colleague is there, to introduce to you and build a relationship. Know who they are. If they are in the same building, much better. If they are like what we have at a global organization, at least talk to them when they are not in it. Say hi to them on a ping, or on Skype, or in Microsoft Office Communicator. Say hi to them. I have no issues. Just want to say hi. Thank you for helping me earlier on that issue. You start that collaboration, because that's uh, what really helps people, or drives people in helping you. And one last thing, I was a meek lamb back then. I was really shy, and I would and say yes sir, no ma'am kind of person. Be a little bit tough. If it supports your end goal, be a little bit tough. If being sometimes being yes ma'am and a no sir kind of person doesn't reach your end goal, stop it. Just say, hey, what you're saying, we can put that in the notes, but this is the end goal. We need the end goal kind of thing. So yeah, it's a really incident management is gained through experience. Yeah, there's some process guidance over there, and we like that will help us jumpstart our career in incident management. But know and be patient that it is indeed an experience. You can apply through experience.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's a pretty phenomenal one at that. I think it really does shape some, as you say, some unique skills, and essentially you can become a bit of a unicorn through it. There's very few people who have the breadth of skills that you develop, and the combination of, as you say, of technical knowledge, but also the leadership skills. It's interesting you say that. I think about the toughness. I think what's required for really good, exceptional major incident management is truth, unapologetic truth.
That's right.
However, I would caveat that with that doesn't mean, or there is an excuse for the way you engage with people. Whilst I think that everything needs to be very upfront and honest between the people you're collaborating with, I think you still need to really understand the personalities you work with and particularly their psychometric profile, and understand the way they interpret information, so that you can support them best to increase productivity, essentially to improve the collaboration. And that that was a big reason of why we included psychometric profiling in the global best practice in
that's right, yeah,
management. It was a really big thing that was missing, even from skilled and experienced major incident managers. And it's interesting when you watch someone who's mastered that psychometric profiling elements, and you baseline their major incidents and the mean time to resolution for them, you definitely notice marked improvements of how quickly they resolve major incidents, particularly in the middle, in the post 15 minutes phase, where you're coordinating a lot of different people all over the place, technical resolving groups, lots of different experts, all with different temperaments. If you understand how to navigate those personalities and those egos, because we all have them to some extent, and make sure that you support everyone appropriately and get the most from them while still being, as you say, a little bit tougher. I think you can create some magic in terms of how effective the operation is. So that's really interesting. Actually, on the same note, I'd love to hear about perhaps the top three people that you feel were influential to your career, the people that really stand out. I'd love to hear about them.
Yeah, actually, and I will apologize. I don't have a top three. I have all of them. I can basically say all of my previous managers really were influential in my career. Not so much for incident management, but for who I am now, because of their trust and their support for me. So I have Edgar Luis, who was my first manager back in IBM. He was the one who kind of became not really a boss, but a big brother to me at that point in time. Just like guiding me, making sure. He has this what do you call this, brutal love kind of thing. he will make you work, but at the same time, you know why he's making you work. We get drunk from time to time, but that's just part of the deal. And then I have Frank Aureliano from Singapore, who really was one of the people who put his trust and believe on what I can do. I also have Francis Tira and Wilfred Stevens, who were there to make sure that I can shine more, offer more of what I can do from an incident management standpoint. Then there I have Mags Magrosky, who is my current manager now in First Data, who really does a lot in believing in me and supporting our team in terms of ensuring, working in the background. He's lurking in the background. He's there supporting us, making sure that everything's happening. So each and every one has their individual personality. And every time I run a bridge, I always put them in my head, and it's like, hey, this is what Frank will do. Here's what Francis will do. Here's what Jed, one of my managers back in HP as well, so Jed Dimana will do. Here's what their temperament will be, and this is how they will approach it. All of those people, not only my managers, but also my peers that I work with. So kind of imagine, like, I will listen to how they run a bridge and how they collaborate, how they work with people, and pick up the bits and pieces that would work for me at that point in time, and make sure that. So I have like multiple personalities when I'm running bridges, depending on who I'm talking to, and that's kind of interesting on the psychometric testing that you put. All the while, I was thinking that when you deal with people, you deal with people. Don't deal with machine. You don't say, "Hey, I paid you. You're needed on the bridge. Log in, solve this issue." You say sometimes the conversation needs to start with a small talk. Hey, where have you been? What are you doing? Could start with a tough brotherly love. Like, hey, what did you break this time? So like, those kind of questions. What did you do this time? So it starts off with that, and then of course, that's only the first 2 minutes, 3 minutes of the conversation. Then you get to the business. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. Here's what's happening. Yeah. Here's what the impact is. How do we do this? How do we resolve this? Or if we experience this issue, we had this issue 2 weeks ago. Is this the same or is different? So we plan our approach, we plan our attack at that point in time. And at the same time, in parallel, I'm like crazy drafting my initial comms on to say, hey, just to say to everybody, hey, we have an issue. Here's what the issue is.
Yeah, just instill that confidence that you're aware and the operations managing. So
That's right, yeah.
Really interesting. That's obviously a lot of people that have touched on your career, and by the sounds of how sought after you are, and some of the career moves that you've had, it sounds like that would be reciprocated from people that you'd mentioned. You obviously keep being invited to new organisations. So it'd be interesting to talk about the tools. So what are some of your favourite tools that you use for major incident management? So whether it's the comms pieces, whether it's individual engagements with technical resolving groups, what are some of the tools that you use and your favourites?
Yeah, my favorite for now is the Adobe Connect meeting. It's actually primarily used for presentation, collaboration, sharing screens, whiteboards, and whatnot. It's like GoToMeeting. It does have video capability as well, but it's developed by Adobe. But we primarily customized it more on collaboration. So this is a screen. Here's the chat pod. Here's the incident description pod. Here's the current update pods. Here is the engagement pods. It's like engagement pod where we have like, here's the database person. Here's the operations manager. Here's the application manager. Here's the application person. So you know who's involved. And then there is this pod where it mentions what are the what are the current updates, description of the issue, impacts, and there's a pod there which says, okay, at 1 o'clock here's what we did, at 2 o'clock here's what we did, at 3 o'clock we restarted the server. It's so useful in a sense that when somebody logs in, all they have to do is look at those pods, look at those sections. They know what's going on, and then probably then catch up. Then catch up on the chat or listen to the bridge. That in collaboration with bridges is really a useful tool. But of course, I don't have my top one. My other one is also being able to page people. I know a lot of companies use OnSolve and X Matters. So X Matters and some of those tools that make sure that, hey, push up a button.
Yeah,
I'll be able to call the resources that I need in order to resolve this issue. And one other thing is I like about OnSolve is that, okay, I paged out, like, say, for example, a database person. That database person might be in transit or busy doing another incident. Then it goes to the secondary on call. And if that secondary on call could be busy or doing something else, it goes to the operations manager, and then it escalates up to a certain level, which as long as you dictate where ours reaches up to the CTO. So if you don't answer and the CTO answers the page, you're in trouble. So that kind of encourages the people to, okay, to answer this page. This is from the incident manager. So those kind of things that supports, and mind you, our CTO, he doesn't get mad when he gets called. Like, okay, I know it's busy. Let me get hold of somebody that might be able to help you out. So he participates. 2 a.m. in the morning is the most busiest guy there is in our organization. At 2 a.m. in the morning, he participates in an incident resolution.
Oh wow! I mean, that's fantastic. That's real leadership. That is, if you've got the CTO as a backstop and getting involved. I know a lot of organisations struggle with that, particularly in major incident management. Because I think there's not always an understanding, because it's not obviously as prevalent as some of the other functions or practices in an operation. That's so X Matters and OnSolve for communication.
Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal actually. So we did the world's first ever virtual expo for major incident management back in March, I think it was now, and there were several thousand people attended. Everything from well-known CIOs of major companies through to operational major incident managers, lots of technical staff attending, and it was really interesting. We had several of the major tool providers, people who specifically provide tools for major incident management, predominantly the communication people similar to X Matters. And what really struck me is that there wasn't a massive awareness originally in the community that a lot of these tools existed. And as you kind of alluded to, they're absolutely phenomenal. They've really come on across the years. If you look at what some of them can do now, as you just mentioned, the automatic calling of people who are on calls, so the technical teams trying to engage them and bring them onto a bridge, for example. These tools are phenomenal, particularly for speed within the initial 15-minute period, but freeing up the major incident manager to perform other duties, and essentially that calling, and if the person doesn't answer, it automatically calls the next person, and obviously those people can respond via the tools.
That's amazing.
Phenomenal. Yeah, it's really impressive. And it's what's more amazing if you baseline organizations who don't have that, particularly in the initial 15 minutes, and the time it takes them to issue initial comms, which ultimately is a confidence piece. It's a sub-objective, isn't it? It's ensuring that your key stakeholders know that the operation is aware there's a major incident and is working to resolve it is a real key piece. And what you see is organizations that don't have these kind of tools are very sporadic in the time it takes them. It's typically much longer than organizations who are a bit more mature and have these tools in place. But it's really interesting, and I think the community could really do with more awareness around some of these leading providers and start exploring and engaging with them. I think over the next couple of years, they're really going to be quite interesting. So I know a lot of some of them are large publicly traded companies, so they have huge resources, but really interesting what a lot of them can do. It's fascinating, actually. Quite a few of them also essentially used for crisis comms in governments. Meaning, so let's say there's a natural disaster or there's a state emergency. So they're really reliable, really quite powerful, these tools, and some of the things they can do are phenomenal. So it was interesting to hear you talk about OnSolve and X Matters. I know there are other providers which I'm sure some of our other guests use. Some of them we'll talk about. But so that's really interesting. It sounds like you use Adobe Connect. For a lot, have you used Slack at all? There's a lot of major incident managers I know who are using Slack for communications at the moment.
And that's the thing. Now, I only know what my organization uses, but now that you mention it, that there are a lot of industries out there that uses the same, or if not other tools out there, it's really amazing. It's really making a big difference on the world of incident management, and hopefully we can move out of the silos that we live in from an incident management standpoint, and know that there are tools, there are best practices out there that we can use and leverage on in order to make sure we have a much more smoother incident management processes and operations. I guess it doesn't really depend on the culture now. Whatever the company culture you guys have, working in silo, really, it will take you a lot more to progress as a team, or be mature enough as a team, if you only rely on yourselves and your interaction with your own organization. If you can just like pick out the window and see what the others are doing, you might be able to learn more and really mature a lot faster, and be able not to influence not just the incident management piece of it, but most probably your whole IT organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the interesting thing is, I think with all of this, it requires championing at the highest levels. So one of the reasons our MIM, our organisation, exists is predominantly for the evolution of the global best practice, which we own and train and certify people in. But actually, it's to build the community. And I think that's a real primary objective of ours, is to shed more light, like you say, to allow people to essentially shortcut the challenges that come with setting up new major incident functions, or perhaps learn from some of us who have been in the industry for a very long time and served at some great organizations. We can help speed people up. And there's, as I said before, my experience is there's very little secretive IP that companies are holding that other companies do not have. So it's a bit nonsensical for us to perhaps stay quiet around major incident management in the fear that we've got some hidden IP that other companies aren't aware of. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us in the community actually to really push our organizations to allow us to have these conversations like you and I are having, and allow others to learn from that. I think, as I say, I think a lot of it stems from really large companies. Marketing and comms departments don't necessarily understand the IT operation, and it's easier for them just to say no instead of to take the time out to understand whether they should be allowing their professionals to engage in these kinds of senses and have these kinds of conversations. But it's a real loss. So, I mean, I would personally urge a lot of CIOs and CTOs to be fighting their team's corner when they're asking to do shows like this or write articles for companies, etc. But it is interesting. I think a lot of it stems from, it goes right back to leadership and the business not necessarily understanding or even quantifying the cost of downtime to their organization. Because if you did,
that's right.
Very few, even mature companies that I see now, managed service providers often who are essentially the leading experts in a lot of what is done. Most of them couldn't quantify either theirs or their customers' downtime. And I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of work with the business. But actually, once you do that, it becomes really, really easy to understand and to make the case for further investments in your major incident function. I think major incident teams would be a lot larger and have a lot more funding. They'd have a lot more access to the right tools. They'd have a lot more access to the right training if companies did quantify downtime and understood the millions of pounds or dollars that's potentially.
That's right, yeah.
And how much a minute, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour of downtime reduced by an effective major incident team can cost. Really interesting with the tools. So I haven't got you for much longer, so it'd be great to ask you some questions around process and what you think about. One of the things that'd be really interesting is to ask you about how, if at all, you think major incident management is changing or needs to change, if at all, in relation to new frameworks, new technologies, new ways of working, things like DevOps and cybersecurity. Because it's conversations we have a lot, particularly with leadership. We talk about it, and I effectively see them as another technical resolving group. I just don't see their processes may differ. There may be extra steps, but the major incident manager is still leading. But what are your thoughts on it?
Well, the thing is, the principle remains the same. It's the restoration of the service as soon as possible time. Yeah, with cybersecurity, there would be some technical expertise that might be needed. It's those who knows the blue coat proxies, some of the other Cisco terminologies that they have, cybersecurity. But again, it boils down to the regular incident management that we have. We have experts from the networks, experts from the server, Unix, Linux, Windows teams. We need to be able to have them focus on where their expertise is and leave the collaboration to the incident management team. Be able to, hey, I have you, what you need, how do we communicate this? If at all we need to communicate it, or communicate it in the down low, or how do we make sure that you guys focus on your expertise and leave the collaboration to the incident management team? And of course, there'll be some overlaps of roles, overlaps of functionalities when it's that. But as you mature on your process, as when you step back, look at the processes, look at the things that have done, that taken place, you would see that with cybersecurity DevOps, they would need to really focus on the restoration of services. Collaboration would be with the incident management team, engaging resources, being able to communicate, engaging as far as vendors, most probably, if needs be. That's where the focus should really be, and that's how we see incident management helping out, being a value to these kinds of new technologies or new elements, so to speak, of the IT industry.
Okay, really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think the base principles of major incident management and the leadership of an IT operation occurs. The only big thing I see in the shift that companies need to make is particularly around cybersecurity, purely because it can the public display of a failure that we have when there's a cybersecurity issue, and we see these every week now. There's a very large, well-known company who's had an attack, or data's been lost, or it's becoming really commonplace. I think there's a big gap that organizations need to understand in terms of even very large companies with resources. Very few of them have crisis comms from a PR perspective. Often don't have people on retainer, or they don't have special individuals with that kind of skills knowledge within the organization. One of the things I think we need to see a shift of is both the cybersecurity and major incident team, or being linked into crisis comms PR teams, who are also, or the marketing department, who are also linked in to their staff who are delivering particularly live services across social media. So you think e-commerce is a really good example of this. They're constantly on social media all day, answering questions, sometimes even provide support through it in real time. What you see is the public kind of flooding these social media, asking questions about what's going on, what's happened, particularly when there's been a small amount of information divulged to the public about a cybersecurity incident. I think there's a real gap that companies are facing at the moment in terms of linking the major incident team into them, and so there being almost a one-to-one relationship, so that the crisis team understand what to put out there, and also that's controlled by marketing. So marketing understand what's being issued, the right level of seniority is signing off on what's being issued to the public. And I think that's an evolution that we'll see over the next couple of years. I think everyone's very slow to move, but it's one of the big pieces of work we do with large companies. We talk to the CIOs about what that looks like, how that's done, how you link them in, what are the pitfalls. But it's apart from that, as I say, I think having access to things like operations that do or attempt to do things like DevOps, where you've got rapid code deployment and you have developers working with live operational staff. I think that's a very good, but I don't think it necessarily changes how major incident management behaves. I think the concepts of restore normal service operations as quickly as possible. If anything, you should have more resources. Cybersecurity is obviously a bit more challenging because of the technical complexity of what you're looking at and the nature of some of it. But again, so it's really interesting. So if I were to say to you, over the next 3 years, what are the biggest changes you would like to see across the major incident management professional? What would come to mind?
It's a lot more automation in terms of resource engagement and comms. So automation, really, and I guess, and this is just a proponent, and I'm an advocate of a known error database. So be able to I know, been an incident manager for 12 years. Each incident is individual. It's really unique to itself. Yeah, there may be a repeat of most probably 5% of the incidents that I handled is a repeat of what happened just recently. But each incident that I handled is really just like, hey, I never encountered this before, and
Yeah.
I'm not surprised, and I'm actually surprised if it happened before, because what happened is that if it happened before, why did it repeat now? Then that's a big issue. But every time I handle an issue, it's unique to itself, except from one of my pet peeves, which is certificate expiring, which we will talk about later on, or on a separate discussion. Certificate expiring, you should know that it expires, so that should not really be an incident. So anyway, it's unique to itself, and if we can have like some sort of automation, and my colleague and I were just talking about it earlier this week or sometime last week, is use of AI. So, like, say, if you have a monitoring tool, your monitoring system like Mugsoft or something detects this kind of issue, how can AI incorporate that and at the same time apply a resolution with just say, hey, incident manager, I'm an AI robot. I found this, I found that. Here's what I wanted to do. Can you click the button to say yes? So those kind of things, that level of automation, and make sure that we can address issues as soon as possible time. Yeah, it could be just like, hey, there's an issue with this particular application. Who do we need? One press of a button, we engage all the necessary resources that we have. So those kind of things. Of course, continuous improvement of collaboration and dealing with people. That's what you said. Your psychometric evaluation that you have put into the training will play a crucial role on how people interact with each other. How am I going to deal with a driver? How do I deal with uh, um, another person, or this kind of thing? It would really play a big difference in the world of incident management.
Yeah, I think one of the things and why we've had so much success in the community is because we fundamentally understood what major incident management was. And I think even though there are many organizations which have very good major incident functions, that they have a couple of gaps. One, they don't necessarily understand fully what the role is in terms of it's a through and through leadership role. And it takes a really unique combination of skills that can be developed. And so I think instead of making it just about the process and the steps and the roles, responsibilities, and all of that good stuff that goes into it, we really understood that we need to develop leaders. And I mean, so essentially our mission, we and what we stand by is we create the best major incident managers in the world. And we really say, even people in our finance department know that is our mission. Our operation team knows that's our mission. So everything we do is geared towards that, which is really useful because it means our desired outcome is very much aligned with any of our customers or clients who choose to work with us. And I think in combination, what we're doing in terms of bringing major incident to the forefront of the conversation, the global best practice that we've developed and how effective that is gives us a common language, the skills that people develop through it, really, really effective. But if you then look at the entire ecosystem, if you combine what we're doing in terms of the training and how many companies we're touching upon individuals with the software companies who are creating, as you say, the automation in terms of the comms and speeding up the process from that perspective. And then you also look at the wider evolution of service management tools, so the ticketing tools, so things like ServiceNow, and you look at how advanced these things are becoming. If you look at that as a combination, I think there's quite exciting things ahead for the industry and for the professionals in it. But yeah, that's completely agree. I think I'd also like to see companies treat major incident management more like they would any other role in terms of The banks are normally very good at this, which is why they retain staff. But even in some really good operations that have great major incident management, they haven't put the time and effort into creating job tiers and the skills that are within that job. So, for example, having a junior major incident role, which someone from another role can transition into, and they are mentored by somebody, and they go through a training program, and then having, say, I don't know, a level, it can be different ways, but let's say a level 2 major incident manager who you anticipate has X number of years experience. These are the competencies and skills they should have. And also there is a different reward package, a different salary package and compensation for that, so that it's something to aspire to. But then also having, say, senior major role, and then you've got your lead major incident manager or your head major. And what it does, like every other job, it gives you a very clear path for progression, both in terms of your personal skill set, but also the impact you have on an operation. So instead of having really talented major incident managers who move out of major incident management purely because there's nowhere else for them to go, they can't develop their skill set, they can't necessarily earn any more within their salary, there's very limited progression. You suddenly have, like every other job, a clear route to progression, which means you retain talent for longer, and people get to grow and develop instead of losing all of that skill set in these individuals. So I think that's something I'd love to see companies start to work on more. And we've done a bit of work with companies on what that looks like and frame it out. But it's a really big challenge, is retaining major incident talent. I know for operations, it's a real big problem for them. But Alan, thank you ever so much for your time. I've got one final question.
Sure.
Are there any questions that you think I should have asked you through the course of the interview that I haven't? Or anything that you think the viewers will find interesting? Or have I been pretty comprehensive?
It's pretty comprehensive. It's just that 1.5 hours is not enough time to really delve into this one. So yeah, I had like a few other samples, few major quirks, some inputs, but yeah, I guess we can talk about it on the next podcast, or we can focus on one particular subject, and then we'll be able to expound on that. So viewers, both CIO up until to the person who wants to be an incident manager, can learn from it, such as dealing with people. How do you get to know about the processes? How do you comprehend such things? It's the kind of things that I have some inputs on. I'd like to share really with you guys and our viewers.
Yeah, phenomenal. I mean, I would love to do a deep dive into the different sections with you. I mean, I think going into the process section would be really interesting for a lot of people, particularly the initial 15-minute period of how you create an effective operation that can engage and mobilize. I think it would be a really interesting topic to do the whole thing on. I think salary would be a really interesting one. I know that there's a lot of people out there who are really interested in understanding the salaries for major incident managers and understanding what that skill set looks like. So we talked or very broadly about the banks being very good at retaining talents and hiring the best experts. I think some of that is down to they understand and they reward in line with that. I think managed service providers in general, I'm generalizing, are really guilty of not doing that, but ultimately it means they just churn through talent. They lose a lot of people, which is a real shame. But okay, Alan, thank you ever so much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking.
Oh, pleasure, Adam.
Really interesting, and I'll look forward to the next podcast with you.
Oh, will do. Thanks.